All right, Kate deGruyter joins me now. I've already touted your brilliance and how impressed I am with you and the organization that you work for at Third Way. But thank you very much for joining me with that brilliance today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, you've had like a very, I think, fascinating career. I just wanted to ask you about that because you worked in Congressman Luis Gutierrez's office for like 6 years. Congressman from Illinois. I interviewed him. Really smart guy. Very well liked, I think, and respected and so on. I forget why he left. I think he just retired. I don't know. But what was that job like? You did some very important work in his office with bipartisan legislation, right?
Yeah, he's an incredibly dynamic, passionate legislator out of Chicago from a majority Latino congressional district. And I was in his office. He was one of the lead negotiators back in kind of the early 2010s around a bipartisan immigration bill in the House. We came much closer than most people realize. And a lot of it was because of that relationship building he did. You know, he's a really dynamic media figure and can really spot an opening in the conversation with just incredible skill. But he could also build really good relationships with Republicans to try and move that really thorny issue forward. And yeah, I learned so much.
On that, and I read that about your bio, that not only you worked in his office, but on that immigration, I covered that bill. And I was on MSNBC recently with a bunch of people who had a lot more credibility than I do. And they were older than me. They covered it too. They either don't remember it or they misremember it. But my recollection was President Biden, Jesus, so far so good. The president was Barack Obama, and Democrats had the Senate and the House at that point, right?
Well, not the House. So that was when John Boehner.
Because to my point, they had the Senate and they had 8 or 12 Republican senators that signed on to and passed a major comprehensive immigration bill out of the very divided Senate. Remember, 2010 was the rise of the Tea Party, yet they passed on one of the most contentious issues, a huge plan, tons of law, billions in funding and security. Went to the House. The House Speaker at the time was Republican John Boehner, and he didn't take it up for a vote, as the story goes, because he thought it might pass and Republicans would no longer have immigration as the same type of wedge issue it was. I've been saying that for a long time. Is there truth to what I just said?
Well, yes, but there's also more to the story. So what also happened was the rise of the Tea Party right around that time. And the bipartisan group actually had plans to meet with Speaker John Boehner at the time to try and push for a floor vote. And that was the day after Eric Cantor was defeated in Virginia, and in a shocking overthrow. And that just put ice on the whole idea of tackling a really challenging issue, because they saw, as part of the GOP leadership team, just how dangerous some of those issues could be. So it's one of those issues that's just heartbreaking to work on, because the need for some like real modern, humane updates to our system is so obvious.
Yeah, well, just so I understand that they Republicans saw how dangerous those issues could be to their political hopes. And as a result of the fact that Eric Cantor was one of those willing to work on that issue, and because of that, he was primaried from the right by a guy, Bratt, I think, Congressman Bratt, who was way further to the right than Eric Cantor was. And he was very, very...
and I wouldn't even credit Cantor with helping move it forward, but it certainly put the idea of them taking some tough votes in a different light for that caucus.
You think they were going to take the vote?
We were working towards it. It was much closer than people realized.
And it was likely to have passed, and then the President Obama would have signed it, and it would have been a major piece of legislation on the issue of immigration, and for the Obama administration, I guess.
Yeah, huge.
Wow. I'm so glad you gave me more color. I want to talk about that more another time, but I want to also talk about these issues that are so relevant and important regarding third-party runs. First of all, just lay out kind of the history of third-party runs in this country. I think you could start with Teddy Roosevelt, because he had the best shot, because he was already president and he ran third-party and he lost. And I think I heard you say add his loss or votes up to all the other third-party runs from Nader to Russ Perot, and they still don't get 270 votes. Did I hear you say that right?
That's right. In the last 100 years, if you add up all of the third-party candidates together, they wouldn't win a single election. And in fact, No single third-party candidate has won even one electoral vote in the last 55 years. And that's in spite of some folks that have really broad name recognition. I think most people have heard of Perot and Nader and whatnot. And frankly, we saw, Jill Stein and Gary Johnson had a huge impact on the 2020 race. It is clear that third parties in American politics are not winners, but they are often dangerous spoilers. And we can talk more about that.
Yeah, we can talk more about it because the dangerous spoiler now, most likely, is no labels. And the short version is no labels equals President Trump. But there's a really important longer version because we really right now need to prevent them from putting a name on the ballot. Tell us what the stakes are.
So No Labels is trying to launch a unity ticket for the White House. This is their first time trying to play in presidential politics. And they are working to get on the ballot in the key states that will decide the 2024 election. And here's the problem. They are going right at the voters that were critical to the anti-Trump coalition that prevailed in 2020. The Joe Biden coalition is really an anti-Trump coalition, and he succeeded in winning a whole bunch of hesitant voters into his column where Democrats failed in 2016. Hillary Clinton lost. We call them double haters. They're folks who don't like either side. There's obviously a lot of chatter about those folks right now.
Yeah.
Clinton lost those folks by about 17 points in 2016. Joe Biden was able to reverse that, and he won double haters by 15 points. He also won third-party voters who, there wasn't a major third party on the ticket in 2020 by about 30 points. And so those were key to winning, especially in the swing states. So if you look at the margins in the 3 blue wall states, which, for Democrats is how you win presidential elections. In Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Donald Trump's margin didn't go down from 16 to 2020 in spite of all of the insanity that we lived through. It went up. And the only reason that Joe Biden prevailed where Clinton lost in 2020 is because there was a huge decline in third-party voters, and that exceeded his margin in each of those states.
It's a crazy statistic to believe, but it's a really important one. If that's accurate, if you really can account for that shift, which I'm sure if you're saying it, given the intimidating way that your brilliance strikes me, you have data behind that.
Well, and let me give you another data point since we're rolling. Maricopa County in Arizona is one of those places that everybody looks to as an indication of who is going to win. Okay. The state of Arizona was decided by about 10,000 votes in the last election, incredibly close. Just from 2016 to 2020, there was a decline of 86,000 fewer third-party voters in Maricopa County alone. That is way above the margin of victory that Biden had in that state. No Labels is not going to run the table. They're not going to, win dozens of states. They've put out a map where they purport that they can win, 25 states. That there's no historical or mathematical precedent for that. And frankly, there's no polling to suggest that that's even remotely in the cards. But they could absolutely siphon off a meaningful percentage of votes. Donald Trump's ceiling and his floor is basically the same. We've all talked about how he could go shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people wouldn't leave him, right? We've seen that alarming. He could
be found guilty of in all these cases and people might not leave him, as the argument goes right now.
But his best hope is for a third party to lower the ceiling for Joe Biden, helping him to win, even though he can't get above 50%.
His best hope, in a way, is No Labels.
Indeed. Yeah.
Now, the issue, there's more that we can talk about in terms of the outcome and whether they actually believe they can win the presidency or they're doing it for other reasons, which you can lay out other scenarios. But before that, I do have to get to who the hell are they? Who are No Labels? Because you can't just come up with a political party without any money. And they have a lot of money. And the issue, because of our terrible, terrible laws around campaign finance as a result of arguably of the Supreme Court, is we don't know who they are. We don't know who's behind them. For all we know, it could be Eric and Don.
So No Labels is a group based out of Washington, D.C. They've been around for a little over a decade, and they have mostly focused over their lifespan on trying to appeal to some bipartisan consensus in Congress. They work closely with a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's basically most of the moderate Republicans and Democrats trying to get some sort of compromise through. But they've now gotten tired of that and have shifted to try and focus on presidential politics. Raising money is their superpower. They do not disclose their donors, and they are able to raise money in unlimited amounts. And right now they are exploiting some loopholes in our system, which is allowing them to use this dark money even as they are registering as political parties in states across the country. So they are registering as the No Labels Party in Arizona and North Carolina and Nevada, states that are going to be enormously consequential, all the while claiming that they are not a party in order to continue to leverage all of this money. We don't know who it's coming from, but there's been some reporting to show that there are some serious Republican ties. Harlan Crow, who's a name folks following all of the scandals around the Supreme Court.
He's Clarence Thomas's vacation sponsor and paid for his mom's house.
Yeah, that Harlan Crow is a known donor to No Labels. We also know that there are folks with ties to the Kushners. There are a ton of folks, both on their staff and frankly, even the consultants that they use that are very Republican heavy. So, there's a lot of anxiety that, if the RNC were to stand up a mission to sabotage Joe Biden, they couldn't do better than No Labels.
Well, I do just think it's important that people, and maybe there's messaging around this that is effective, that generally speaking, no matter your politics, don't vote for a candidate, much less a party, where you don't know where they're getting their money. Like, if you don't know who's funding them, then don't support them, because people should be transparent about such things. I used to think there would be unanimity on that idea. I feel like that still might be a winning message, but how can they possibly be a legitimate brand without knowing who's funding them? Now, I guess the issue that matters next and finally is who's on the No Labels presidential ticket, and you've got some news on that of who it might not be.
So what we know now is that they're looking to put a Republican at the top of their ticket. The plan has always been to pair a Republican and Democrat, but as we all know, who's in the White House and sitting behind the Resolute desk matters enormously. And the person who they've chosen to roll out their policy campaign and who is a top prospect is somebody like Jon Huntsman. He's a former governor of Utah. And, we've got some warnings out because, No Labels offers themselves as a, common sense mainstream outlet to bring solutions. And yet on some of the most important issues of the day, including on abortion, they're backing folks like Jon Huntsman, who is an extremist who has boasted about signing every pro-life bill that crosses his desk and who would support an abortion ban. And so, there are real reasons to believe they are very out of step with the views of the American public.
Yeah, I used to pal around with Jon Huntsman and his family when I was back in the corporate media days. I met him a couple times. Nicest guy in the world, nicest people. And then started seeing later on his policies that he supported, not only as Utah governor, and so many others. The guy
he endorsed Trump.
And he endorsed Trump, which was what should have finished him and anybody in the Republican Party. But just, a dangerously likable guy was my point. If you met him, if you heard him, he's a little awkward though in the end, I remember. But still, I say it's going to be some actor. Kate, are we looking for one of these actors that is like, oh, I'm a third way. I'm not either. I'm Matthew McConaughey.
Well, I'm sure that the No Labels leadership would love to have somebody with massive name recognition. Yeah. And, we've seen in the era of Donald Trump that, non-traditional candidates are sometimes, attractive to the public. We're working very hard to make clear to prospective candidates for the No Labels ticket that this is a legacy destroyer. Anybody who is affiliated with this ticket is going to go down in history for helping clear Donald Trump's path to the White House.
Yes.
And so what we want to make very certain is that people understand that American democracy is on the line, that they would have a personal responsibility in ushering in its decline. And, one of the things that we're gravely concerned about is that No Labels strategy seems to have shifted recently. They've been going around talking about how they can win the election outright. And yet they put out some data recently that actually shows that they've known for months that that's not going to happen. What we've seen and what we fear is that what they're hoping to do is force a contingent election. Here's how that works. If you can win
hold on, let me just tell everybody, contingent election was words I heard Kate say on MSNBC to Simone Sanders the other day. I'm out in the yard, in the garden, and I hear Kate, who's this, I hadn't heard of her, but I knew the third way, and I was like, this person sounds very smart, and you started talking about the contingent election. I stopped doing what I was doing so you could explain what this is, because I think it's a super important thing for people to understand. Probably not going to happen, but possible for sure, right?
Very possible. Certainly more likely than them winning the election outright, defying all of American history. So in a contingent election, we all know that to win the presidential election, you have to get 270 electoral votes. But what happens if no candidate does that? That is a contingent election. And if no labels can win a handful of electoral votes in the right places, which a whole bunch of different pro-democracy groups have warned us is absolutely possible, and which their own data showed they might be trying to do, they have talked about using that moment to create leverage, where they would try to cut a deal in order to push faithless electors. Now, we heard about that in the 2020 election.
Yeah.
This is that redux where they would try to push a handful of faithless electors to vote against the will of their state in exchange for whatever they can negotiate from the major party candidates. Now, here's the even scarier part. That's likely to actually trigger a provision in the 12th Amendment that throws the 2024 election to a vote of the United States House of Representatives. We've watched a lot of House votes on television lately. In this scenario, it would look very different. The provisions would require the House to vote by delegation, where each state gets one vote. Right now, there are 26 delegations controlled by Republicans out of the 50. That means the House vote is going to reelect Donald Trump. This is Mike Johnson's MAGA House of Representatives. They are absolutely going to reelect Trump. And there is just no path where Democrats are going to win in the places that we would need to in order to take a majority of state delegations. We could retake the majority of the chamber and still not have a majority of state delegations. In a contingent election, that's the ballgame where the race for the White House would get decided, and it would happen in the most dangerous and chaotic way possible.
Yeah, because Wyoming would get an equal vote to California.
Exactly.
Which would be problematic because Wyoming has 600,000 people and they're all the same guy. And California has 33 million people and they're more different. All right, I'm being a jerk to Wyoming's lack of diversity, but I made the point, which is they've got more states and they would then likely appoint Trump. They wouldn't have to. I guess they could
vote. They would vote and that would seal the deal.
Yeah.
And so that's the very scary thing. And look, we talked about this. I worked in the House of Representatives for about 6 years. I watched January 6th on television, and I knew every hallway that I was watching being flooded with protesters. That was my office. That was my commute, the hallways that I walked through. The danger of a small group of elite people trying to force presidential electors to vote against the will of their voters in the wake of what we saw on January 6th and the big lie is obviously enormous and dangerous.
The reason why you focus so much on no labels is because they're the most likely to get on the ballot, as opposed to some of these other third party or third candidate, lane runs from RFK Jr. to Marianne Williamson to Cornel West to Jill Stein. Now, I guess she's running again. There's several, I could be hundreds of other people running, but all of them added up wouldn't make much of a dent. But no labels because they wouldn't be on the ballot necessarily. Is that the issue, that you're more focused on no labels because they're actually going to, through their convoluted, corrupted way, get on the ballot on states, every state?
So in 2024, all third parties are dangerous because they risk splitting the anti-Trump coalition. We know that American politics right now are very closely divided. I wish I could tell you that there was going to be a landslide next year, but I think you and I both know that that's probably not how this is going to play out. Small differences can make an enormous impact if those voters are in the right places. Now, because of what we talked about earlier, No Labels has $70 million in dark money funding their ballot access campaign. They are far and away the best funded of all of the third-party candidates. And that gives them a big advantage over someone like RFK or even Cornel West. Because Cornel West and RFK are named candidates and they are not running on a party line, they have to fund their ballot access requirements using hard money, which is to say money that is raised in small increments in accordance with federal law from donors who are disclosed. So Elon Musk may love RFK, but he can't cut a $12 million check to him and help him get on the ballot. He can only give $3,000 like anybody else. And so that makes the effort for him to get on the ballot in those states much harder. Now, obviously, we're going to watch how that plays out. If they do get on the ballot in those key states, that could be impactful. But right now, No Labels is much further along in that effort than the other candidates.
And I guess the important thing right now is to get this message that you are putting out there everywhere possible so that nobody considers voting for No Labels or I think you're asking No Labels themselves to step down, to stay out of presidential politics. Is that what you really like to see ideally?
No Labels has said all along that if they can't win, that they will stand down. And it is very clear to us that we are at that point. This is the moment where if that is truly what they believe, they need to stand down. Now, we will see what happens. They are scheduling a nominating convention where if they choose to go forward, they could nominate, a Republican to lead their ticket in March. Right now, our message is talk to your friends, talk to your elected officials in your community. They are trying to sell you an illusion. They are trying to tell you that they can win and that this is a different moment in American politics. The choice next year is going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And any candidate that pulls from the Biden coalition, which is an anti-Trump coalition, is going to help him win. So we need to be very clear that No Labels is going to reelect Donald Trump. They are hurting the coalition that Biden needs to win, and they need to stand down immediately.
Last thing I want to ask you is, I'm a very principled voter in person, Kate. I really am disappointed in many of the things that the Biden administration has done or not done. The oil drilling project in Alaska, I don't think they've done enough for voting rights. I feel that there's issues regarding guns that they could be doing more of. I hate the way that they've supported Israel seemingly more than the Palestinians, and I'm really turned off by that. I've got other ones, so I don't know. I mean, I'm just not convinced to vote for Joe Biden. What do you say to me? Because these are issues. These are real issues. I didn't make these up. I'm really principled, and I care a lot about those issues. He's really disappointed me, or I think I really disagree on what he's done there.
Well, my message to you is if you care deeply about democracy and voting rights, if you care deeply about gun safety and making sure that your kids are safe at school and when they come home, if you care about climate and having a sustainable green economy where we actually have jobs that are going to pay a good wage for your kids, Joe Biden has done more to move the ball forward on those things. And the reality is that a Trump administration is going to wipe out a lot of the progress that we have fought very hard for and leave us in a very dangerous place. I don't need to remind folks, but if you haven't been watching the things that Donald Trump has been saying, he has been talking about his opponents as vermin. We see the way that the MAGA crowd has, assault rifle pins like badges of honor on the House floor. This is not an administration that is going to be working for your interest in any of these areas. And the danger to people that you care about is very real and urgent. And, I think we're a year away from the presidential election. There's a lot of things that I think, folks of a lot of different stripes would like to see from, our national political conversation. We're always going to have to keep pushing for more, but I think that choice is going to really crystallize as we get into next year and people understand that it is going to be Biden versus Trump and they have to choose. And the impact for all of those issues for the people who care deeply about that is going to be very stark.
You're so good. Very, very convincing. I love it. Why do you think, I swear it's a final question, why do you think that people have the perception that they do or don't about Joe Biden, who arguably his administration, along with Democrats, has been able to accomplish more than almost any other single term in our lifetime in so many ways and made such a difference in a lot of different people's lives. But the perception isn't that. I feel like it'll never be that about any president, no matter how good or bad they are, because just the way our media atmosphere is, it doesn't allow necessarily for achievements to be measured by, just in terms of the incentives of media and the incentives of elections and so on. But what do you think there's an answer to why people don't understand how much the guy has been able to accomplish, his administration has been able to accomplish?
Look, I think history is going to be very kind to Joe Biden when we step back out of our kind of daily political battles and look at the totality of what he accomplished in, remarkable circumstances. And let me just posit for your listeners, Nancy Pelosi had the same margin that House Republicans had, where there were only 4 or 5 Democrats that she could lose on any one vote. We have seen how that tore apart the House of Representatives this year. Democrats were able to organize, to focus, and to deliver victories with those exact same margins in ways that will have lasting implications for decades.
Yeah.
Now, I know that there's more to be done. I think Biden has to hit the road and tell, the folks what he's done. And I know that they're going to do that.
Yeah. Democratic leadership should be given credit for that major accomplishment. She should actually as well. I mean, even back.
Nancy Pelosi's a badass. Let's not let history forget that.
You know her. You worked with her. What's her secret sauce? She's just like, how does she get everybody? It's so hard to get everybody. They always say Democrats are like herding cats, but she was able to do it. Why? How?
Well, she is an excellent vote counter. Knowing exactly where your votes are and how you get them is a key part of that job. Nobody was better at counting votes and knowing where her caucus was than Nancy Pelosi. And I think the other part of it, she would often hearken to, the challenges of motherhood and wrangling a house full of unruly folks. And, there are some real skills that legislators bring to the table that serve them well in really intense negotiations. And she showed that she could be an absolute force in those immense negotiations.
I'd love to talk to you more about your time working in the House and with Congressman Gutierrez and what else you think works in terms of messaging and actual policy achievements. I look forward to talking to you again, and I really appreciate you joining me. It's so important, Kate. Keep up the good work and tell your colleagues at Third Way we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Pete.